Hey, 42 here. By 1978, Dickie Eklund was on top of the world. A successful boxer, he was the only man alive to go the distance with Sugar Ray Leonard, one of the greatest fighters to ever step foot in the ring. But by 1993, this would all change. As the subject of an HBO documentary, Eklund led a group of filmmakers around his hometown of Lowell, showing them where he grew up and outlining his intentions to make a comeback into the world of boxing. But the documentary was not what he expected it to be. Called High on Crack Street, Lost Lives in Lowell, the documentary was an expose on the crack epidemic of the early 90s, tracing its origins and focusing on the lives of three addicts in the economically depressed former mill city of Lowell, Massachusetts: a prostitute, her pimp, and former boxer Dickie Eklund. The film documented Eklund's struggle with addiction, his attempts to reform himself for his career and his young son, as well as his efforts to prevent his habit from relapsing, and when he failed, the crimes he committed to feed it. It was a documentary Eklund saw for the first time in prison after he had been arrested. Although fooled by the documentary crew, the film was simply about what was happening before the camera. Had Eklund recovered from his addiction and pursued boxing, it would have been about what he wanted, but instead, his addiction had consumed him and, for now, destroyed his life. Nobody wants to ruin their life, and perhaps you never think you will. But every day, many of us make decisions that fundamentally and irrecoverably alter the trajectory of our lives, sometimes for the worse. Whilst many people's lives are destroyed through no fault of their own, such as health issues or a lack of support or opportunity, others are caused by the decisions we make every single day. Decisions each of us hold responsibility for. So, here are some interesting ways you can totally bugger up your life that can mostly be avoided. Most of us understand that having good finances is important, but few understand just how destructive being fiscally irresponsible can actually be, and just how easily money issues can tear your life apart and sometimes end it altogether. Whilst your mind may immediately jump to the most extreme financial issues such as bankruptcy and homelessness, there are more subtle but insidious ways that poor financial planning can utterly destroy your life. And you're probably doing at least one of them already. Scientists have spent years studying the many health risks that come with poor finances, and because in America at least 62% of people's mental and physical health is directly affected by financial stress, these risks have to be taken seriously. Financial stresses aren't just psychological, they also physically hurt and even damage the body. Possibly even fatally. Migraines, insomnia, increased levels of physical pain, inability to go to work, which further increases stress, and cardiovascular disease are all strongly linked to having financial stresses. Cardiovascular disease at 23.5% is the World Health Organization's leading cause of death globally. Generally speaking, it's not a good idea to increase the likelihood of your most likely cause of death. But you could be doing exactly that with your finances right now, and you might not even realize it. But even worse than this, financial stresses have been demonstrated to have a clear negative effect on mental health, triggering destructive conditions like depression, hopelessness, and other mood disorders. Perhaps even more concerning is that financial stresses drive at least 1/3 of us to seek out unhealthy ways of coping, such as overeating, drinking, or perhaps, worst of all, compulsive spending. That's right, sadly, many people spend to deal with their anxiety over their spending issues. These only exacerbate your financial problems and further degrade your mental health, trapping you in a painful, toxic spiral. Interestingly, financial stress also affects your ability to problem solve. So before you think, well, I'll just pull myself up by the bootstraps, think again. A study published in Science demonstrated that people struggling with poverty found it far harder to engage with abstract thinking and cognitive control when faced with expensive bills. The mere sight of something they would struggle to afford was enough to significantly impact their ability to problem solve. The irony of this is what makes financial hardship such a vindictive destroyer of lives. But how does this subtle yet destructive financial stress come about? Obviously, debt is the largest cause of financial stress, but often debt can be so sneaky you don't know it's happening to you until it's too late. 80.9% of American baby boomers are in debt, as are 79.9% of Gen Xers, and the average UK household debt stands at £15,400. These are typically credit card debts, medical debts, student loans, personal loans, overdraft charges, payday loans, and overdue phone and utility bills. In other words, money borrowed to pay for something that could not otherwise be afforded. Whilst this in itself may seem like a harmless choice at the time, such as taking out an expensive phone contract for the new iPhone, the way debt is structured can cause lasting and debilitating effects on one's life. Not only are you paying a whole chunk more overall for the item than you would if you purchased it outright with cash, but if you fail to pay back the loan or don't make payments on time, then you will usually be hit with a higher interest rate every year until the debt is paid off, which compounds the debt, further increasing your liability. This is made even worse when you consider that roughly 22% of people default on loans and end up taking out another loan to pay it off, which adds multiple levels of compound interest because you're essentially paying interest on a new loan to pay off interest on an old loan plus the amount borrowed. Of course, this only compounds stress and only delays the inevitable. Debt also hurts your credit score, which can greatly affect your ability to take on necessary debt in the future, such as buying a house or car. It also, in effect, takes away from your future income. If you are in debt with minimum payments of £100 per month, then that is £100 you have to pay, or it simply increases the next time, possibly even resulting in debt collectors knocking on your door, or a date in court. I know that sometimes debt can't be avoided, and I'm not trying to berate those who get into unmanageable debt. I'm simply discussing how it can, unfortunately, ruin your life. For all the incredible good that capitalism does, debt is undeniably one of its ugliest facets. Compound debt is precisely what happens to former billionaire and liquor tycoon Vijay Mallya, aka the King of Good Times. He racked up enormous bank debts, and when I say enormous, his company, Kingfisher Airlines, owed $1.35 billion in 2015. His high-flying party lifestyle certainly didn't help matters. Vijay was left unable to pay his debtors, and the banks soon came after him. Using a diplomatic passport, he fled India to the UK, but as of April of this year, his appeal against extradition failed, and he'll likely be brought home to face justice and further ruin to his reputation. The king of good times for others maybe, but not so much for himself. Alongside debt, many of us have no savings, which in easy times is fine, but in times of crisis such as now, or retirement, can become a serious problem that greatly affects our life. Almost 1/3 of all US adults are reported to have no emergency savings. And one survey even found that 58% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. If you find yourself on the wrong end of ill health, you could find yourself in desperate want of money you never knew you needed. So, is there anything else in life that can totally destroy your future like debt can? Well, yes. Try poor social skills. Believe it or not, but the consequences can be just as bad. In simple terms, poor social skills don't allow you to foster meaningful connections with others. And when this happens, we experience a painful sense of loneliness. And when I say painful, I mean quite literally. Loneliness isn't just some fleeting, mildly annoying phenomenon. It's one of the most dangerous, persistent, and damaging emotions to your health and mind that you can possibly experience. Unlike when you're late for an appointment and the stress leaves as soon as you arrive, in the case of loneliness, you're left with a persistent, aching feeling that does not go away unless you form a meaningful, reliable relationship. And this can take a lot of time. This is why lonely people often feel like they're searching for something they need, but cannot find it. And this searching process is extremely painful. Social skills are largely formed amongst your family and learned over time. But whilst they can be learned, few of us actually practice the skills needed. Skills such as opening up to others, emotionally supporting them, asserting oneself, starting relationships or introducing yourself to people you meet in the world. We generally interact with others with little regard to the skills we're developing. This has been made a lot worse by the fact that modern communication methods such as instant messaging don't produce the intimate neurochemistry needed to form lasting bonds, teach social skills, and heal loneliness, which can only be gotten from face-to-face communication. The lifetime costs of this can be immeasurable. For example, loneliness is deeply linked to stress, depression, and anxiety, which have widespread effects on every aspect of your life and overall well-being. Likewise, it is also strongly connected to dementia, heart disease, and overall mortality, with some writers and researchers referring to loneliness itself as an epidemic that must be treated, especially when loneliness, traditionally high in the elderly, has been growing in young adults and teenagers. It's no wonder then, in the UK alone, loneliness-related conditions like depression and anxiety cost the country £77 billion per year. More abstractly, whilst loneliness may have debilitating effects on your mental and physical health, gradually degrading the quality of your life, poor social skills will also affect your opportunities in life and your career. Asserting yourself and asking your boss for a raise will be significantly more difficult, and you won't have the widespread social connections that gave birth to the phrase, "It's who you know, not what you know," which unfortunately is true more often than not. Just as damaging are poor relationship choices. Choosing your partner in life is one of the most important choices you can make, but few of us understand just how important that truly is. Many studies have concluded that a bad marriage is as damaging to your health as heavy smoking or drinking, whilst huge swathes of evidence suggest that married couples live longer and are happier. So if it's good, it's great. If it's bad, it's terrible. With a failed relationship, there are several costs. The pain of the breakup is obvious, but in the case of marriage, well, 50% of marriages in the US end in divorce, and each comes with an average of $15,000 in legal fees. And because most couples split their assets 50-50, psychologically, you have to deal with the blow of losing half your assets. For some couples, this can be extremely destructive both financially and psychologically. The rate of suicide is 2.4 times higher in divorced couples, and divorced men are 9 times more likely to commit suicide. Psychologists think that the biggest cause of poor relationship choices and bad social skills is a lack of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is essentially one's ability to recognize his own emotions and the emotions of others and understand how to interact with them. In layman's terms, it's about having empathy. But whilst a lot of us sweat about our IQ, how many of us are actually concerned about our emotions? Well, you should be. There are some alarming costs that come from having poor emotional intelligence. To name a few, you will tend to blame others more, become more argumentative, communicate poorly, get easily and needlessly offended, lose control over your emotions and have outbursts, project your own flaws onto others and fail to recognise that you are doing so, have no idea what others are feeling and thus unable to help them. You'll probably call them overly sensitive, you will easily get overwhelmed by emotionally intense situations, you will likely damage your work relationships, personal relationships, and reduce your psychological well-being, and you are much more likely to be psychologically destroyed by trauma. So all in all, having poor emotional intelligence is fairly bad news. But another way that many of us ruin our lives is that we fail to work on the things we want to work on, or even worse, fail to develop a work ethic of any kind. Now, don't worry, you don't need to pull a Mark Wahlberg and start waking up at 2 AM to pray and play 30 minutes of golf before you hit the gym, but you definitely need to at least have an average work ethic. Failing to do so will leave you chronically unproductive, possibly unemployable, expose you to greater risk of financial problems, and potentially even have you ostracised by your friends due to your bad influence. All of which comes with the costs I've already discussed. But the bar isn't that high really. In a 9 to 5, 8-hour working day, studies have shown that people, on average, only do work for 3 of them. So, you only need to develop the habit of being able to focus on the work you're doing for 3 hours. Not much. And as authors like Daniel Goleman have noted, focus itself is a muscle. So the more you work at it, the better it gets. Focus and self-control are so important that one longitudinal study from New Zealand that followed 1,000 people over 5 decades noted that young children's self-control predicted their health, wealth, and criminal history later in life, no matter what their social background or IQ. So, start practicing that focus, but be warned, it goes both ways. The less you practice it, the worse it gets over time, like a big life-destroying snowball. Likewise, many of us don't work on our dreams. We want to be an author, a filmmaker, an inventor, or better yet, a handsome mustachioed YouTuber. But we think we can't do it, or worse, think we can, but continually wake up feeling like we don't want to that day and tell ourselves we'll do it tomorrow. But you know the drill. That tomorrow never comes. I've got news for you. Not many successful people actually enjoy the work they do on a daily basis. They may claim they do publicly, but the truth is, they enjoy achieving their goals, but not the menial daily slog. Consider this quote. I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now, and you'll live the rest of your life as a champion. Well, if even Muhammad Ali hated what he did, why would your process be any easier? This is one of the secrets to getting things done. You're always going to have to do something that sucks. You are always going to have to do something you don't want to do. So choose the thing that sucks the least. After all, if you don't push yourself and you simply sail through life, have you actually lived? As Mark Twain said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from safe harbour. Now, there's one method of ruining your life that is perhaps more effective than all of the others combined, and it is the same one that tore Dickie Eklund's life apart. Addiction. Addiction is one of the most dangerous conditions you can deal with in life, and will certainly rob you of your money, your mental and physical health, friendships, relationships, change your personality for the worse, land you in prison, or kill you. And it's far easier to suffer from than you'd actually think. Addiction comes in a variety of forms. Sure, drugs and alcohol are the obvious, but there are countless others such as sex, gambling, and even video games and internet use, which can all be equally as bad, unless of course it's an addiction to my videos. One of the reasons addictions are so powerful is that generally they all operate under the same principle. They hijack your brain's dopamine reward system, which controls your motivation and reward centers and focuses all your brain's energy on whatever that addiction is. Smoke more crack, drink more booze, play more Call of Duty. This creates a vicious cycle where one continually engages with his addiction despite the negative costs to his own life. It doesn't matter if we don't do the work we need to, we stress our partner out or blow all of our money. Eventually, it's hard to think about anything else other than how and when you're going to get high again. But whilst the drugs themselves come with literally hundreds of life-destroying symptoms, there are a couple of symptoms that come with any addiction. The first is withdrawal. Because of how effectively addiction hijacks your dopamine reward system, when you take away your source of addiction, i.e. going cold turkey, you will begin to experience withdrawal. For example, people who quit certain drugs can have terrible seizures and migraines. But even people going cold turkey on their video game addictions can feel terrible feelings of emptiness and sadness, depression, and desperate attempts to rationalize returning to gaming. This means that unlike other issues in this video, addiction is extremely hard to curb once it has its claws into you. Everything in you will want you not to quit. Another symptom is the cost it has to relationships. As addiction takes over more and more of your life, it has a trying cost on your relationships, building a lack of intimacy, trust and distance between you and your close friends and partner. When they start voicing their concerns about your habits, you will often resort to lying to get them off your back, or worse, violence. And whilst you're probably thinking, look, that's fine and all, but I don't have an addiction, perhaps you need to take a closer look. Addiction doesn't start with some dramatic movie-like choice where something traumatic happens and you suddenly down an entire bottle of Jack Daniels with your cornflakes. An addiction's origin is usually more camouflaged and much more insidious. Most addictions begin by accident. You try something once, like everyone does, thinking, what could go wrong? But whatever sadness, emptiness or pain you had thought was normal to live with, suddenly goes away as soon as you take your drug, gamble or play your game. Things just seem to feel different and better when you're using or doing it. Life seems better. Until, of course, you stop. And from there, it's a very, very slippery slope to wanting more and more, with devastating consequences. But look, I don't want to end on a down note. To bring it back to our story at the very beginning, former boxer Dickie Eklund was in a bad place. He'd destroyed his life through alcohol, landed himself in prison, and even had his entire failure broadcast to the world over HBO. But his story didn't end there. Eklund strived to get clean, faced his withdrawal head on, and began to regain some control over his life. Eventually succeeding, Eklund was released from prison and helped to coach his half-brother and former boxer Mickey Ward on his comeback trail. He coached his brother for 26 fights, including what became Ward's legendary trilogy against Arturo Gatti, all three of which were awarded Fight of the Year and will go down in history as some of the greatest boxing bouts of all time. And although he has struggled with addiction since, he has taken the steps towards regaining control of his life, showing us all that the important fights we win aren't the ones in the ring, but the ones we face against ourselves. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider supporting me on Patreon, because it really helps me to continue to make these videos. The link's in the description. Also, you can get your hands on a first edition signed copy of my new book, Stick a Flag in It, by heading on over to Unbound Publishing and pledging today. The link's in the description. Thank you.